Hi poetry lovers, this is Bella Cohen with my YouTube channel, Bella Poetry Presents. My channel exposes the listeners to the wonderful, fascinating, interesting stories of well-renowned poets and introduces them to their beautiful, beautiful poetry. We have 4 series. The first series is called The Female Poets of the 19th Century, the Victorian Era. The second series is called The Best Love Poetry. The third series is titled The Russian Poets of the Silver Age. And the fourth series that we started this year is called Poetry at Random. I basically select poets that I personally like, and they could be, if they're not chronologically ordered, and I just talk to them. It happened so that the 9 poets that I presented so far from different countries are female poets. And today we'll be talking, this is our 10th segment, and today we'll be talking about an almost incredible story of famous, at the same time almost the most famous female poet of the pre-19th century America. And the name of this poetess is Phyllis Wheatley Peters. So as usual, I show you the picture. And judging from the picture, you can tell that she was actually not a free woman. And let's start talking about her fascinating story. So Phyllis Wheatley was seized from Senegal, West Africa, when she was about 7 years old. She was transported to the Boston docks with a shipment of refugee slaves who, because of age or their physical frailty, were unsuited for very, very rigorous labor in the West Indies and southern colonies, the first ports of call after the Atlantic crossing. In the month of August 1761, in want of a domestic help, Susanna Wheatley, wife of a prominent Boston tailor, John Wheatley, purchased a slender, frail female child for a trifle because the captain of the slave ship believed that the little girl, was terminally ill, and he wanted to gain at least a small portion of what he paid for her, the small portion of the profit, before she died. She was very thin when she was sold to Wheatley's. She was almost naked, slightly covered by a carpet, old dirty carpet. They thought that she was about 7 years old, and that's a quote from The Circumstances of Shedding Her Front Teeth. The Wheatleys, including their son Nathaniel and their daughter Mary, did not entirely excuse Wheatley from her domestic duties, but taught her to read and write. Soon she was immersed in Bible, astronomy, geography, history, British literature, and the Greek and Latin classics. By the age of 12, Phyllis was reading Greek and Latin classics in their original languages, which is totally amazing, especially considering the fact that she did not have any formal education, as well as difficult passages from the Bible. At the age of 14, she wrote her first poem titled To the University of Cambridge in New England. In 1773, at the age of 20, Phyllis accompanied Nathaniel Wheatley to London, in part for her health, because she suffered from chronic asthma, but also because Susanna believed Phyllis would have a better chance of publishing her book of poems there rather than in the colonies. The Wheatleys often exhibited Phyllis's abilities to friends and family. Strongly influenced by her readings of the works of Alexander Pope, John Milton, Homer, and Virgil, Phyllis began to write poetry. By the time she was 18 years old, Wheatley had gathered a collection of 28 poems, for which she, with the help of Mrs. Wheatley, ran advertisements for subscribers in Boston newspaper in February 1772. Many colonists found it difficult to believe that an African slave was writing excellent poetry. Wheatley had to defend her authorship of her poetry in court in 1772. The court concluded that she had written the poems ascribed to her and signed an attestation which was included in the preface of the book of collected works that was titled Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, and it was published in London in 1773. With the 1773 publication of Wheatley's book, Poems on Various Subjects, she became the most famous African on the face of the earth. And I have to say that the book was pretty successful. Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, was printed in 11 editions until 1816, so for quite many years. Then suddenly Susanna Wheatley died in the spring of 1774, followed by the death of her husband John Wheatley in 1778. On April 1st, 1778, despite the skepticism and disapproval of some of her closest friends, Wheatley married a man called John Peters, whom she had known for some 5 years, and she took his name. John Peters was a free person. He called himself Dr. Peters. He practiced law, kept a grocery in Court Street, exchanged trade as a baker and a barber, and applied for a liquor license for a bar. By all accounts, he was extremely handsome. He wore a wig, carried a cane, and quite acted out the gentleman, quote unquote. The economic conditions in the colonies during and after the war were very harsh, particularly for free blacks, who were unprepared to compete with whites in a stringent job market. These societal factors, rather than any refusal to work on Peter's parts, were perhaps most responsible for the newfound poverty that Wheatley suffered in Wilmington and Boston after they later returned there. Like many others who scattered throughout the Northeast to avoid the fighting during the Revolutionary War, the Peterses moved temporarily from Boston to Wilmington, Massachusetts, shortly after their marriage. Between the years of 1779 and 1783, the couple may have had 3 children, though evidence of the children is disputed by some historians. And Peters drifted further into penury, often leaving Wheatley Pierce to fend for herself by working as a charm woman, while he dodged creditors and tried to find employment. During the first weeks after the return to Boston, Wheatley Peters stayed with one of her nieces in a bombed-out mansion that was converted to a day school after the war. Peters then moved them into an apartment in a run-down section of Boston, where other Wheatley relatives soon found Wheatley Peters sick and destitute. As Margaretta Matilda Odell recalls, she was herself suffering for want of attention, for many comforts, and that greatest of all comforts in sickness, cleanliness. She was reduced to a condition too loathsome to describe. They lived in a filthy apartment in an obscure part of the city. The woman who had stood honored and respected in the presence of the wise and good was numbering the last hours of life in a state of the most abject misery. Yet throughout the lean years, it was surprising to learn that Wheatley Peters continued to write and publish her poems and to maintain, though on a much more limited scale, her international correspondence. She also felt that despite the poor economy, her American audience and certainly her evangelical friends would support a second volume of poetry. So between October and December 1779, with at least the partial motive of raising funds for her family, she ran 6 advertisements soliciting subscribers for 300 pages in octavo, a volume titled Dedicated to the Right Honorable Benjamin Franklin, one of the ambassadors of the United States in the court of Paris. And that would include 33 poems and 13 letters. As with poems on various subjects, however, the American populace would not support one of its most noted poets. Phyllis Wheatley Peters died uncared for and alone. She developed pneumonia and died on December 5, 1784, at the young age of 31, after giving birth to a daughter who died the same day as her. When she died, John Peters was incarcerated. He was forced to relieve himself of the debt by an imprisonment in the county jail, which at that time was a punishment given for debts. Their last surviving child died in time to be buried with his mother. Recent scholarship shows that Wheatley Peters wrote perhaps 145 poems, most of which would have been published if the encouragement that she begged for had come forth to support her the second time. But this artistic heritage is now lost. She was honored by many America's founding fathers, including George Washington, who wrote to her after she wrote a poem in his honor that the style and manner of your poetry exhibit a striking proof of your great poetical talents. Critics consider her work fundamental to the genre of African American literature, and she is honored as the first African American woman poet to publish a book of poetry and the first to make a living from her writing. So today, as always, we will read 2 of her poems. The first poem is called On Being Brought from Africa to America by Phyllis Wheatley. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught by benighted soul to understand that there is God and there is a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. So the second poem is called A Hymn to the Evening. Soon as the sun forsook the eastern main, the pealing thunder shook the heavenly plain. Majestic grandeur from the zephyr's wing exhales the incense of the blooming spring. And though the air their mingled music floats, through all the heavens what beauteous dyes are spread, but the west glories in the deepest red. So may our breasts with every virtue glow, the living temples of our God below, filled with the praise of him who gives the light and draws the sable curtains of the night. Let placid slumbers soothe each weary mind, at morn to wake more heavenly, more refined. So shall the labors of the day begin, more pure, more guarded from the snares of sin. Night's leaden scepter seals my drowsy eyes, then cease my song till fair aurora rise. What a beautiful, beautiful poem. So I hope you enjoyed the story of Phyllis Wheatley. It's an amazing story of survival, of achievement, of struggle, and final victory when she succeeded to publish her book of poems. Unfortunately, her story did not end well, and she died too young. So that's it for today. Please don't forget to like and to subscribe. And we're going to see you next week at Bella Poetry Presents. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.